The attempted undoing of Donald Trump has brought up more than a few contentious subjects as of late, some of them ranging from the depths of 4chan conspiracies to whether or not women should be allowed or should work in certain roles. And it's the latter that I want to focus on a little bit today in this shorter episode on the Redacted Culture Cast. Now, the intent of the argument is not to create a sort of negative view of everyone who pursues any sort of career, but rather to separate those who are trying to, in a sense, pursue something, maybe being misguided by others who have an agenda. And so, for example, there are a number of pictures circulating around the internet revolving whether or not the women who are on Trump's detail were qualified or should have even been there. And it raises questions about DEI hiring and so on and so forth. And what I want to do, and I actually would rather, instead of trying to talk about the merits of one way or another on whether or not women could or will perform under such issues, I think it is actually a little bit more nefarious and a little bit more important to strike at the root of the problem. And that is that when you allow people to have control over the reins of who works in certain positions, who are not only not interested in the well-being of the outcome, but rather for producing something for ideological means. So let's take a minute here and bring up the episode sponsor, and then we'll get into it. And so Obsidian Arms has sponsored this show. They have been sponsoring the Redacted Culture Cast for some time now. They are the first ones on for us, and for that I am very thankful. Now, what are some of the things that Obsidian Arms does that you might be of interested in? Well, if you have any intent on being self-sufficient, whether it's in your home or in any sort of business around the gunsmithing industry or business, then they have a series of tools that might be very much of interest for you. They also come with a lifetime warranty, and so whether or not you find out yourself using one tool more than another and that one wears out or gets broken, have no worries. You can always send it back to them, and then they'll send you a new one. In addition to that, they have a series of services where they can take your ideas and your works in progress and your concepts that you have been developing and wanting to bring to market, and they can help facilitate that quite well. There are a number of products that you might have in your safe that are actually made by them. You just didn't know it yet. And so I recommend going and giving Obsidian Arms a check at obsidianarms.com. Leave a comment below. If you are on the newsletter, you'll get a discount code for them. If you are part of the Black site, you will get that as well. And so this question about should women work in X in this position or that position has been going on for a long time. We would be foolish to think that we are the first people asking or even combating with this question. And there are many historical arguments that are made. And the arguments that even kind of extend beyond this have to do with things like, in the Christian realm, complementarianism versus egalitarianism, where complementarianism argues that men and women are equal in value before God, but have different skills or different drives or different directions or different purposes, essentially a different intent or purpose in their creation. And that the differences between men and women are not contradictory but complementary to one another, whereas egalitarianism, which I think is the weaker of the two arguments, argues that there is no distinction, there's no meaningful distinction between men and women when it comes to certain things or many things. And so the extreme, the very sharp edges of both sides can certainly create a lot of a lot of tension, whether it's that there are distinct roles for men and women that are not only set in stone, but any attempt to not abbreviate, but stray away from whatever the current dogma is would be considered almost heresy. That can get a little rough. Or the other side is that you get in the other one, the extreme or more extreme version of egalitarianism is the argument that there is no distinction at all and whatsoever between men and women, oftentimes relying on some sort of cultural argument as if gender is a social construct and so forth. But then what is this? Where does this matter, and why does this matter to what we're talking about? Well, there were a couple of pictures and videos that were released or captured during the moments after Donald Trump was shot in the head. Um, and it included a or what is at least alleged to be a secret service, which I don't know why you call them secret service anymore. They're not all that secret, but a secret service detail that included a number of women, and there's been plenty of commentary on how unflattering that position works. Now, or how unflattering their performance appeared, whether it's under pressure, not being able to holster a pistol, or not really putting one's life on the line, which is supposedly what your job is supposed to be in order to protect the presidential nominee, your charge of sorts. But I think this draws a much deeper question, and it has elicited a bunch of conversation as to why that might have been the case. And you could maybe start with, was there something about the characters who underperformed underperformed under pressure? Is there something about them being women that made that happen? Or is there something, or was it something else? Was it individual capabilities? And for as long as this conversation has been going on, or at least that I've been hearing about it, and mind you, I was in the military at a time when in the unit that I was a part of, there were no women. There just were none. And as far as I understand, that has changed. But to be more specific on it, at that time, that question was starting to float around: should women go to ranger school, or go to here, or can women do this? And the first question that I want to ask is a question of strategy, and that is maybe even deeper than strategy, but goal. What is the mission? And the framework of the question was almost always phrased in, well, women can do this too. Or if a woman, an individual woman, can perform to the same level as the men in the unit, or to the standard, what artificial gatekeeping should we be doing? Should we even be preventing women from performing in a combat role if they are able to meet the standards, including physical standards and so forth? Now, this question, I think, is actually a bit of a disingenuous argument. I think there's something wrong with it. And the thing that I think at its core of what is wrong with this question, or this argument, is that it kind of bears with it maybe a sense of arrogance, suggesting that whatever the status quo is either good enough to be maintained without any sort of, or good enough to be maintained but have the addition of women added to it, or that it's somehow uncouth or unjust that women are not allowed to apply for these positions, particularly that of special operations, Army Rangers, Navy SEALs, Green Berets, Delta Force, MARSOC, Marine. Go on, example. You pick a unit, pick a profession, and you will certainly find somebody complaining about it. And why I think this question is actually misleading is because it is a distraction from what these people are typically aimed at doing, or what I believe they ought to be aimed at doing. The question is always framed as, well, if a woman can do just as much as what a man can do in this arena, and the assumption is made that this is possible, but the argument begins with, if a woman can do this, then why shouldn't she be allowed to do it? And then a whole bunch of money is spent and time is spent arguing this way and that over whether or not that should be the case. But really, we should be asking ourselves the question of what is going through the minds of such people in these supposed prestigious positions of authority over these hard to achieve units and high professional positions, where they are so unconcerned about doing better at it, or creating a sharper unit, or a sharper tool, or having a higher level of mission capacity, that they think that, you know what, instead of making our soldiers better or improving their quality of life, we should see if we can add this to it. And the best argument that they can come up with is not that it makes the world better or their unit better, but that it won't be bad. And you've all heard that kind of argument said before: oh, it's not that bad, when you find out that under the right circumstances, it really, quite frankly, turns out to be true. Now, there's no shortage of scandal around women who have attempted to achieve or graduate from noteworthy positions or noteworthy schools like Ranger School and so forth. And the scandal around it oftentimes includes things like, were the standards lowered specifically so that they could be ushered in? And so this is where I think the critical failure is. You could imagine two very different people. One person is a young woman who has the ambition of becoming, let's just say, a Secret Service agent or somebody of distinction within a what has formerly been known or has been up until this point known as a male exclusive position. Now, she has been told that the doors have been opened for her, so she has prepared herself, and she has got herself in physical and mental fitness so that she may accomplish the tasks or accomplish the selection process to up to the standard. And she is there with this with the words of affirmation in her heart and in her mind that say, "You can do it. Look, the door has been opened for you." And that person might be in all intents and purposes, of goodwill. And she might be intending to fulfill some honorable duty. Now, that is one person. There's an entirely different person who exists in the world who believes it is their objective. It should be their objective not to lead or make the position or the people that they are responsible, not to make their lives better, not to make them better at what they do, not to ensure readiness on a unit level, not to ensure that people are performing up to standards and make that not only more possible, but even better if they could even teach or develop new ways of training and doing coursework and whatever the question is, that the people who are under their charge not only meet the standard, but exceed it and have free time to boot, as the phrase might go. But instead of focusing on these things, combat readiness, skill set development, mission development, area of operation understanding, no, the person is not interested in these things that are immediate and germane to the field. Rather, they're interested in meeting ulterior motives. The ulterior motive being they want to see their ideological support instigated in the community that they have some responsibility for. And so you could imagine somebody who's not necessarily a commander, who doesn't necessarily have skin in the game in the same way that a lieutenant might in a small unit team, but rather someone who is far disconnected from the consequences of their actions, but believes that they need to spend their effort, energy, and resources in order to make women enter into the position or to get women into the position. You could say DEI quotas are a really good example of this, that they're committed to not choosing the best people and the most capable candidates for the position, but rather those that fit the quota, or at least the quota has an undue weight on it. Let's just say that you are handed a quota where 20% of your force or 30% of your force is supposed to be women. Well, if of the people who apply, you have 30 women and 300 men, that what is the likelihood that you're going to reach that? And you're hiring 100 people. Fine. We'll just say you've got 30 women and 300 men, and you're hiring. You're going to be selecting 100 candidates. What is the likelihood that all 30 of those women meet the standard? Well, if you look at the statistics when it comes to the dropout rates of such courses, you can answer that pretty quickly. It damn sure is very rarely, if ever, 100%. And this action has negative consequences. Remember, I gave two different examples. We had the woman who is told that if she meets the standard, she can perform the job, she can wear the title, she can honor the name. And then there's the other person who has made it their decision or made it their mission not to improve the lives of their charge, but to meet and enforce quotas that are, at this point in time, only enforced on ideological grounds. So these two people are different. And I'm going to use an example, and this is a story or a bit of an example that I have used in the past. But if this is new to you, if this is not new to you, bear with me. If it is new, here we go. At the time that it's no secret at this point in time that I served in the Army's 3rd Ranger Battalion, and this was more than 10 years ago, so I'm not exactly blowing OPSEC out of the water. But at the time that I went into the military, I understood that the selection process for getting into Ranger Battalion, which at the time was referred to as RIP, was a very grueling experience. You oftentimes would have something like 115 candidates start and maybe 25 graduate. I think Nick Irving was recently on the Sean Ryan show, and he gave even more aggressive statistics, something like 115 start and 5 are selected. But the course that I was in, the RIP class that I was a part of, started with something like 315-ish students and graduated with 218. So we went from a 70 to 90% attrition rate for standards and for people quitting to less than a 20%. And so barely even, I mean, at least if I look at those statistics, not even a 10% statistic. And so what that means is that what happened to the standards? Did our class that had almost 3 times the average a number of candidates just perform that much better on the individual level across every single student, or did something else happen? Now, for those of us who are in at that time, and like I'm using myself as this example, many of us could sit on the parade field during graduation and look to our left and to our right and look at somebody that goes, "There's no way that he made it, and there's no way that he didn't." You've got one guy to your left, and you look at him, and he doesn't fit the standard. You know who they are because you know they haven't met the standard, and you ask yourself, "How did you pass? What happened?" And you look to your right and you look at somebody else who probably outperformed you. And you look at him and you say, well, of course you did. You're excellent at what you do. If there was an honor grad, it might have been you. But then you have to ask the question, where do you line up? And ultimately, if you've heard the term imposter syndrome, I don't think that exactly fit the definition for what was going on, but it is a good similarity. So now you have a person who gets into this so-called prestigious unit, and I think it is a prestigious unit, who gets into a prestigious unit like Ranger Battalion, and the first thing that they are faced with is not a moment of pride in their achievement, which will quickly be humbled by their team leader, by the way, but rather a sense of uncertainty as to whether or not they even met the standard to begin with. I mean, you might think that you passed all the pieces, but it doesn't really add up with the math. You might have passed the PT test and the ruck march and the land navigation and the shooting portion and so on and so forth. But it's supposed to be harder, right? Like this whole selection process was supposed to leave you confident that you were selected for a reason. But instead, you get ushered through because maybe numbers need to be met. The surge is happening. It's 2009 after all. Who knows, right? Now, this is what I want to go back to the example of the young woman who is seeking after she's seeking after a position. She's seeking after a position of some repute that up until this time has been exclusively only available to men. And she now goes through the selection process and is left wondering at the end whether or not she made it through because of her merit or because she was ushered through by an agenda. Now, what you've done here is that the person who is behind this manipulation has not only corrupted the honor and dignity of the establishment that they, whoever it is, has had authority over, but they have also wounded and perhaps crippled the supposed example of what they wanted to get into the unit. Let's say that a person is in some sort of position of authority to determine that their unit will now be requiring to have a 30% acceptability or access rate, or 30% of their force must be women. And in order to achieve this, either standards are lowered or corners are cut or issues happen. But, by golly, it's achieved. To those women who have been entered into this position, they will now, and it will probably forever or for at least a long time, hang over their heads as to whether or not they deserved to be there or whether they were ushered in for something that had nothing to do with them. And while people who get into these positions oftentimes immediately feel like they're the only person who doesn't belong there because that's what it feels like to be a new guy in these kinds of positions, now they have an added layer of was I just given was this all just a giveaway? Was the prestige of this unit always a joke, or was it a joke to begin with? And I hope to have been painting this well enough to demonstrate the consequences of how these kinds of actions, what kind of consequences these kinds of actions produce. It is not so much about the merit of the argument in the sense of whether or not women who can perform to standard should be allowed to do the job. Rather, the problem more often takes place because you have people who are disingenuous in their objectives. They are, instead of leading and making the pointy end of the stick sharper, they are more concerned about things that have nothing to do with the well-being of their men. They're not leading by example. They are sacrificing their own soldiers on the altar of some sort of personal merit. This is no different than a commander putting his men in harm's way for nothing other than his promotion. Mind you, same motivation, different circumstances. And so ultimately, this is where anyone in my position might find themselves canceled very quickly on social media and so on and so forth. But, as the phrase goes, fuck it, we ball. Do I think women belong in special operations? If you're going to make that argument, if the question is going to be answered, the first question that I think needs to be answered, the first preliminary component is, what value does it add? Now, there are some good examples of how having women on a team have added value to the team simply by nature of them being women. For example, on a security team, sometimes you will deal with women victims. Women who are victims of certain crimes probably don't want to be questioned and maybe, let's say, dealt with. That's not the right word. They don't want to be questioned or frisked or dealt with in that capacity by a man. There was actually a very simple argument that was made recently, and I thought it was quite well done. It was that you imagine working security for a casino. I think the example was given. Occasionally, there are types of occasionally things happen at a casino that are not to the level of use of force, but where somebody in that capacity would be of use. For example, somebody falls down in a bathroom or has an injury of some sort, or needs to be searched for contraband. Now, I, for one, would be uncomfortable in certain circumstances being cavity searched, as they say, by a woman in public, in this kind of very, whatever. I would be uncomfortable with it. Of course, it's just uncomfortable. It's not like immoral. But like, and the same thing would go the other way. If I was going into an establishment and we had to be searched, I might be more comfortable with a man or a woman, but I would be uncomfortable, and I believe my wife would be uncomfortable as well if the only people who were going to search her person, her body, were men. So there are some examples of where it could be useful. Another example that we saw was CST, which was, I believe, called a cultural support team. And when we would go into, when we would be in situations that involved families, particularly in Afghanistan, the advantage that CST brought is that they could get different types of information out of the women who were found on a target building or on a target. And so that was a genuine value add. There is no net positive by saying women can do just everything that men can do. Newsflash, no, you can't. But we'll skip past that part. But the point being said is there is something to be said about, do you add value or are you just doing the same thing, albeit with more not consequences, but more complications? Are we trying to make our world, and are we trying to make our unit better? Are we trying to make our men better? Are we trying to become better at the job? Are we trying to become sharper tools? Are we trying to make our secret service more capable of defending, or are we more interested in meeting a standard or an objective that bears no good fruit for the organization at all? It's not about whether women can or cannot perform a position, because we would want to evaluate that, at least some moral grounds on the individual level, but rather, why are you wasting so much time, effort, energy, resources, and putting people's lives and morals at risk just so you can say that you met some quota? Well, if I haven't burned any bridges, which I don't think this is going to be the most aggressive one, if you want to support us, you can head over to redactedllc.com. Please check out Obsidian Arms at obsidianarms.com. And if you want to stay up to date with us, we have our newsletter, and you can find us on Instagram at redactedllc. Until next time, go forth and conquer.